How does the United States prison system, and by extension Ohio's own prison system, work against black women? This is the first question we must consider when beginning dialogue about the system. To begin, we look at the numbers in the big picture and then narrow our gaze to Ohio. According to the Sentencing Project, a Washington, D.C. based research center that looks at the racial disparities in the United States criminal justice system, African American women are more likely than women of other races to go to prison during their lifetimes. Not only are they more likely to go to prison, but according to a 2014 Bureau of Justice Statistics report, black women, they are significantly overrepresented in state and federal prison populations. The incarceration rate of black women was more than twice the rate of white women. To give actual numbers, 109 out of every 100,000 black women in the U.S. were sentenced to either a state or federal prison, while only 53 of the every 100,000 white women were sentenced. In a report by the Kirwan Institute at Ohio State University, they found that black Ohioans are only 13% of the population but make up 44% of those imprisoned. They are also more likely to be arrested than white Ohioans are for similar offenses. They found that black Ohioans are incarcerated at nearly 6 times the rate of white Ohioans. Ohio reflects the nationwide trend in the criminal justice system working against black women. Black women in Ohio are imprisoned at nearly twice the rate of white women, and people of color overall are more likely to be arrested and are typically given longer sentences than their white counterparts. So what crimes are black women convicted of? Finding the answer was harder than anticipated. To begin narrowing my search, I reached out to a friend of mine, Caitlin Upton, over social media. Upton was a volunteer practice at Carswell Federal Medical Center in Fort Worth, Texas. Her experiences was useful to researching the topic of black women in prison because her volunteer position required her to meet with felons weekly. Many of whom were black women, said that a common anecdotal observation of her time working with these women was the common thread was girl's boyfriend is what got her locked up. With frequent trends among women locked up with histories of abuse and poverty relate to Ohio's prison system. We will find that black women in Ohio's prison system are also at a disadvantaged population similar to those whom Upton worked with. First, let's look at what crimes black women are mostly likely to commit in the state of Ohio. These charts produced by the Ohio Office of Criminal Justice Services are from one of the most recent studies on the subject. Dating back to 2009, they show research specific to Ohio that is divided between race and gender, but they do not look at the overlap between them. This is harmful to understanding what crimes black women commit the most often and why. Because women of all race are represented in the charts, but we know that arrest rates between races are not equal. As stated earlier, black women are twice as likely to be incarcerated than white women and also receive longer sentences. Black women have spoken out about this, and they are looking into why they are incarcerated at these higher rates. Karen York, executive director of the Job Opportunities Task Force, spoke on it in an interview from the Real News Network.
Well, also, in talking about the rising number of black women going to prison, so it's been said that a lot of black women are committing crimes because they're defending themselves from crime. So can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, I think that ties into the first question, right? This idea that we're constantly on defense, right? Now, there's a piece of me where you could argue that many times we are on defense because we lack access to services and resources and support because we are viewed as untouchable or someone that cannot, you can't reach them, as if there is some issue, some overwhelming issue that, is that cannot be overcome, right? If you just provide me with access to all of the other opportunities that our whiter, lighter counterparts may have, right? And so when we think about this idea that we're only interacting with the system because we have to fight and that we're defending ourselves, many times, and Nicole can talk about this more than I can, many times they're entering into the system because of survival. So you'll find stats that will show that, women are going to be more likely to suffer from financial crimes or from sexual crimes, right? Which we like to call quality of life crimes, quite honestly, because these are crimes of survival. These are, last resort. This is what I identified as necessary to support myself and my family. It may or may not be legal, but I felt that I didn't have any other option.
And, before I touch on the fact that, like you said, 67% of black women who are incarcerated for nonviolent offenses.
It means the 16.7% of women arrested in Ohio in 2009 were statistically a black majority, and there is a high possibility of wrongful conviction when acting in self-defense. To further this claim, we look to Ohio's own self-defense laws. These laws are defined by the state as a presumption that a defendant acted in self-defense or defense of another if he/she used force intended likely to cause death or great bodily harm to another if the person against who the defense force was used unlawfully entered the residence or vehicle occupied by the defendant. In such cases, the burden of proof in self-defense cases rested on the defense in the state of Ohio until March 2009. In practice, this meant in self-defense, the burden of proof was on the shooter to prove their innocence. Because of the law being in such fashion, it is impossible to gauge how many black women in the aforementioned statistic were acting out of self-defense. According to the Ohio Association of Community Action Agencies, the highest poverty rate in 2009 in Ohio was held by the black community, with a 33.2% rate. Because of the high poverty rates in the backward self-defense laws, we can say there is a possible connection between black women lacking resources due to poverty, which could mean losing the opportunity to have a good attorney, and being wrongfully convicted for self-defense without proof in 2009. Let's return to the topic of felonies. Not only do black women in Ohio risk wrongful conviction, there is also the fact that people of color are disproportionately charged with felon convictions, according to the research by the Quran Institute at OSU. Felony convictions are more likely for black women and women than for their white counterparts. In Ohio, this means facing hundreds of collateral sanctions which restrict their rights to housing, employment, education, family involvement, and more. Black women risk felony convictions more than white women, which means they are harmed after their release from prison as well. In Ohio, the prison system also has a statutory minimum of a 6-month sentence for the felonies, which means those sanctioned are automatically guaranteed more prison time due to the type of conviction. For black women, this means not only risk of being sentenced to prison or jail time, but also risk longer sentencing times. Mandatory minimum sentencing started in the 1970s and continued throughout the 1980s during President Reagan's time in office. It was established by the United States government and the justice system to cut down on crime and the war on drugs. Mandatory minimum sentencing disproportionately impacted black women. During this time period, judges had less power to decide on sentencing lengths. Mandatory minimum sentencing is associated with the crimes that have the most significant impact on society, for example, drugs, guns, and violent crimes. However, if the length of the sentencing for certain crimes is predetermined, there is no discretion available to the judges to make into consideration the plea by the defendant. The most significant issue with minimum sentencing are drugs. Black women who may or may not have been involved with the process of selling drugs are sentenced to lengthy prison terms without the option of parole. The drug issue can be seen in the book titled The Impact of Incarceration and Mandatory Minimums on Survivors, exploring the impact of criminalizing policies on African American women and girls, 2017, by the Office of Violence Against Women. The book reads approximately 59% of the women who are imprisoned in the federal system are serving time for drug offenses. These women who are not convicted of violent crimes but are still imprisoned with inmates who committed violent crimes. Furthermore, the book explains presenters and participants discussed the ways in which drug sentencing laws and higher sentences for crack cocaine in comparison to powder cocaine have led to black women's disproportionate representation among women incarcerated in the federal system. Participants commented that many of the women convicted in drug cases had not sold drugs or had minimum involvement in the activities giving rise to criminal charges, but were nonetheless subject to mandatory minimum sentencing and conspiracy convictions attached to mandatory minimums. An example of minimum sentencing that severely disrupted a black woman's life is the case of Kimba Smith. I paraphrase from the impact of the incarceration of mandatory minimums on survivors, exploring the impact of criminalizing policies on African American women and girls. Smith was an 18-year-old black woman going to college where she got involved with an abusive drug-dealing man. The relationship disrupted her academics, and she became involved with the drug dealer's criminal activity. Even though there was no evidence Smith sold drugs, she was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Also, it was her first offense without the option of parole because of mandatory minimum sentencing. Consequently, mandatory minimum sentencing is contributed to one of the factors of mass incarceration of black women. To compound the issues mentioned above, black women are not trustworthy of the police to begin with. Considering the negative experiences that black women have faced, black women have been stigmatized by the idea of being an angry black woman since the beginning of the United States. This stereotype is particularly evident when it comes to an abusive relationship that black women can find themselves involved with. As a result of not trusting law enforcement, black women use the idea of self-defense. However, self-defense strategy can create more problems. When police are called, black women can be seen by law enforcement as the aggressor and can be arrested because they are standing up for themselves. The stereotype of being an angry black woman and a strong black woman create the assumption that they cannot be maltreated, raped, and or survivors of violence because of the perceptions of these stereotypes. Black women and girls are rarely prioritized in policymaking in the criminal justice system. Because of their race and gender, they are almost translucent in the eyes of policies compared to their male and white counterparts. In policymaking, there is no intersectionality. Black women are either seen as female or black, never both. Intersectionality is discussed in the book by the Office of Violence Against Women. They write, "A one-size-fits-all approach works no better for responding to the needs of survivors than it does for sentencing schemes like mandatory minimums." The LGBTQ community is even less protected and represented concerning policies in the criminal justice system. Just because people are deemed criminals does not mean they do not deserve human rights while they're behind bars. For example, in Black Sexuality, Patricia Collins discusses the questionable practices used by guards and prison employees. Collins writes, "Routine practices such as strip searches, verbal abuse, restricting basic privileges, and ignoring physical and sexual assault among inmates aim to control prisoners by dehumanizing them. The process of dehumanizing inmates creates issues of re-imprisonment. Instead of trying to help black women, prisons make it difficult for black women to readjust to society once they do get released. The criminal justice system appears to go after black women even if they are attempting to make their lives and family lives better. In the case of Kelly Williams Ballar, as described in the news article by the Washington Foreign News Company, the article reads, "When Kelly Williams Ballar, a single black mother living in public housing in Akron, Ohio, was sentenced to 10 days in jail for sending her daughter to the Copley-Farallon school district outside of her jurisdiction, the issue of what parents, especially black low-income parents, will do to get their children a better education grappled the headlines. Williams Ballar was working and going to school to become a teacher. However, she was charged with 2 felonies. The charges that are now on her record will not allow her to become a teacher, all because she wanted her children to have an opportunity at a better future. Faking residency is not the only time parents have tried to get into the specific school district." The article continues by pointing out school district officials testified that some 30 to 40 similar residency issues had risen with other families during the 2 years at the issue of Williams Ballar's case. No one else faced criminal prosecution or civil court action, the school official said. Does the question arise why Williams Ballar was singled out? Was it because she was an African American, a woman, struggling financially, or all of the above? In the end, the criminal justice system in the United States disproportionately impacts black women regarding policy and practice as compared to their male and female counterparts. Black women are never at the center of discussion when it comes to policies that would benefit them. Laws and legislation have been passed, eliminating the discrepancy between one case and another, creating the buildup of incarcerated black women. The Ohio Reformatory for Women is the largest women's prison in the state of Ohio. The prison has a little less than 3,000 inmates of minimum and medium security levels. The Ohio Reformatory for Women is often recognized for the variety of rehabilitative programs and having the largest diversity of programs in all of the prisons in Ohio. Ronette Burks Trosdale is the former warden of the ORW and is the current Bureau Office Chief of Reentry for the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. Former Warden Burke Trousdale elaborated on the types of programs and their significance as it relates to the effect they have on inmates. These programs include cognitive behavioral programs such as Thinking for a Change and Decision Points. They also offer victim awareness, money talks, tapestry, hearts, horizons, and many more. The Ohio Reformatory for Women also offers vocational programs such as cosmetology, building maintenance, administrative professional support, web design, dog apprenticeships, and many more. They also offer GED, pre-GED literacy, ABLE, and college-level courses. The literacy program is catered towards inmates that achieve no higher than a third-grade reading level. The program helps inmates achieve their educational goals and are assigned to a literacy unit based on their placement on scoring rubric. Tapestry is a long-term treatment program that was designed to help drug abuse offenders. This program consists of regularly scheduled activities such as counseling sessions, seminars, meetings, and job functions. The program is known to be extensive, vigorous, and demanding. The program encourages inmates to analyze every aspect of their lives and relate it to the effect drug and chemical abuse has had on them. Horizons is a program that is established in a collection of dorms and house female inmates of different religious backgrounds. Inmates are able to apply to be part of this program, and their applications are sent to the chaplains. Thinking for a Change ultimately promotes emotional intelligence and encourages inmates to assess their own actions and thoughts. Money Talks teaches inmates about money management skills and basics banking information. Heart is a program that encourages women to focus solely on their recovery. For this program, inmates are screened and recommended for admission into the program. During Burke's Trousdale term as warden, African American women made up 19% of the prison population. Though Burke's Trousdale had never witnessed an overrepresentation of black women in the ORW population, she has seen a need for programs catering specifically to African American women. However, the ORW has created seminars specific to African American women. Some of these programs include Black History Month activities in the month of February, and Sister Monics, which is an economic program facilitated by the 100 Black Women Coalition. Burke's Trousdale noted that most of the creativity that comes through these implemented rehabilitative programs comes from the African American inmates. These black women often write plays, shows, and other performances for other inmates. Many African American female inmates at the Ohio Reformatory for Women created their own choir. In an interview with a couple of inmates, they expressed their interest in music therapy. They strongly believe that the choir serves as an innovative for rehabilitation. Music therapy creates an escape of the prison environment for these women. Most of the women at the Ohio Reformatory for Women are incarcerated for low-level, nonviolent drug offenses, but African American women, however, are often classified at a higher security level. Burks explained in an interview that as an African American woman herself in the criminal justice field, she is aware of the political campaigns that target minorities and often negatively affect other African American women. Not only is she aware of the political campaigns, but also observed the pattern of laws executed to increase penalties for crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. According to Burke's Trousdale, the Ohio Department of Rehabilitative and Correction is actively looking at their classification system and how it affects minorities, specifically black women and women negatively in unintentional consequence. Unfortunately, Burke's Trousdale noted that the Office of Reentry does not monitor recidivism rates by ethnicity, but solely by gender. The mission of the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction is to reduce recidivism among those we touch. In order to accomplish this mission, the ODRC has increased their pragmatic opportunities for education for all. As Bureau Office Chief of Reentry, Burke Trousdale has helped come up with solutions that ensures the local communities can have an active hand in reducing recidivism rates, specifically in Ohio. Employment and housing are two of the biggest challenges men and women face upon their re-entry into society. But within these two challenges, black women endure gender, racial, and class discrimination. Creating opportunities for employment that is life-sustaining and safe housing is important to keep people from returning to prison. Additionally, access to resources is critical. Mentoring black women prior to release and re-entry into a community has been proven to be beneficial. The narrative of the black women has often been omitted from the retelling of historical events in relation to the oppression of black people. Starting in the 1970s, Ohio University students participated in programs with the purpose of making black women aware of various social issues that many affect their demographic. Establishing programs catering specifically to black women allows them to be aware of the levels of prejudice that they may endure and can successfully navigate a patriarchal society. According to the African American Affairs newspaper in Athens, Ohio in 1973, Ohio University students established the Black Women's Forum. Black women must be aware of the issues from the inhumane incarceration of black people to the blatant racism that pervades the campus. The forum must be a significant motivational force that will add impetus to the struggle that we have focused on ourselves here. The Office of Reentry, through the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, is actively working to fulfill their mission of reducing recidivism in Ohio. The ODRC established the Office of Enterprise Development. The purpose of this office is to create opportunities of employment and training programs for formerly incarcerated citizens. This is done through partnerships with private businesses. Ronette Burks Trousdale also works as head of this office. The department also runs the Restored Citizens Program. The purpose of this program is to maintain a database of formerly incarcerated people and restored inmates that would be placed in the hands of various employers for approval. The Office of Reentry is also responsible for the Offender Workforce Development Program. The purpose of this program is to also find life-sustaining employment, but in a difficult capacity for the Office of Enterprise Development. There was an increase in the Ohio recidivism rates from the year 2013 to 2014 by 1%. As the year 2019, there are more than 4,500 female inmates in the Ohio prison system. Nonviolent drug offenses take up 35% of the total amount of crimes put against women in Ohio. In the 1970s, the Ohio Reformatory for Women was the only women's prisons. But now, through the ORW, is the largest women's prison in the state. Dayton Correctional Institute and the Northeast Integration Center in Cleveland, Ohio, also house female inmates of minimum and medium security levels. The Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction has been under heat for the rapid growth of female incarceration for drug use. Though this has been an evident issue for many years, there has not been the expansion of specific innovations of rehabilitation that are needed. The key to implementing a positive impact on recently incarcerated individuals is to implement programs and treatments that are specific to people's circumstances. There also is a need for an alternative to incarceration for adults.